Good afternoon and welcome to the issue 51. Our topic for the day is confirmation bias. What does that mean? Well, I was just having a discussion with a client about a detective ignoring evidence to the contrary, ignoring evidence that what she believes about my clients is just wrong, flat wrong, that she's been misled and misunderstands the situation. And this happens constantly in courtrooms. We call detectives to the stand, or we call witnesses to the stand, and we question them about a set of events. And it's interesting, as the trial goes on and the stories developed as to what really happened in the particular event, the witnesses that come on later and later will generally have their own belief system and their own belief of the story. And though you present them with solid, believable, confirmed evidence that's contrary to their belief, they'll hang on to the belief, they'll hang on to their idea of the story and completely ignore the evidence. Completely ignore what they're telling you. And then when you challenge, you're like, well, now that you've seen that evidence, now that you hear what I'm telling you, your story has to change, right? You have to think differently about this. And they say crazy things like, no, I don't know if that evidence is real. I don't know if that evidence is true. Well, I just showed it to you. I just handed you a picture that proves what you believe is wrong. Well, I don't know. Maybe you could have made up the picture. I don't know where that picture came from. I don't know who took it. Well, I just showed you the picture. I just told you who took it. I just showed you. You just acknowledged that the picture is what it is. The judge allowed it into evidence so that it's real and it's authentic. We all understand that it is. So that's got to change your story, right? Nope. Doesn't change my story. I still believe the way I believe. I've literally had this exact conversation with witnesses, where they just stick on whatever it is they believe, whatever it is their story is, they just absolutely ignore evidence. They disregard evidence that doesn't fit their story, and they gather all the evidence that does. Here's the thing. Here's the real question whenever you're doing a sales pitch, or you're talking to somebody in your life, or you're telling a story in your life, or you're explaining something that's going on. Shit, even considering something that's going on in your own life, right? Your own confirmation bias about your own body, right? Oh, I have this 10 pounds of extra fat. Well, man, I'm just not working out enough. Well, I worked out 4 times last week. Well, maybe 5 times. If I worked out 5 times, that would be it. And we completely ignore the fact that you ate ice cream 3 days last week. Or you completely ignore the fact that you ate 2 dinners yesterday. Because you don't want to tell the truth, right? There's this confirmation bias that it's not my diet, it's exercise, right? And so in the courtroom I have my belief system. Here's the problem. When I'm telling stories to a jury, if the jury's adopted a belief system in jury selection or in opening statements, or the first or second witness that takes a stand by the state, all the subsequent evidence they hear, all the information they get contrary to that comes later, will just be ignored, flat ignored by a jury. And they'll stick with the original story they believe. And in fact, it gets so bad that they'll argue against evidence in the jury room. They'll say, no, that's not what that document said. That document said something else. You're misremembering it. I'm right, you're wrong. It's really something else. And I equate it to jury because it's what I've done a lot. It's where I've seen it in other people. But the truth is it happens in myself, right? It happens in myself with this story about body, right? This story about why I can't lose this last 10 pounds, right? And I like to look at the exercise part of it. I like to say, well, I'm not exercising hard enough, or I'm not exercising 7 days a week, or I got to go from doing 30 minutes to 45 minutes to an hour, or I got to do more cardio and less lifting, or more lifting and less cardio. But what it really is going on, and I know this because in my body and the level of health I'm at, it really is all diet at this point. I meet the minimum level of fitness. I meet the minimum level of exercise every week. If I'm not injured, I'm in the gym enough to stay very, very healthy and to be very lean. And the truth is that doubling that is just not going to make a difference to my body. Doubling my exercising is going to make a difference. The truth is that what I have to do is I have to work on my diet. And so when my diet is really solid and it's hitting on all cylinders and I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, that's when the weight comes off. That's when I lean up. That's when I trim down. And in order to keep my diet, I would have to work out like 4 or 5 times as much. I'd have to do 2 a day, 7 days a week, 7 days of cardio, 7 days of lifting. I'd have to blow myself up and probably injure myself in order to make up for the ice cream I eat or the donuts I have on Saturday morning. Or here's the other option for me in that regard. I just have to decide that I'm living the life I'm living and I'm cool with the way I look, right? I'm digging it. Like, I made it this way. This is the frame I set, and so I'm okay with it. Here's the thing, though. I mean, that's my personal life, right? That's my personal life with my body. Here's the thing. When I'm telling a story to someone, when I'm talking to a detective about a case, or I'm talking to someone that's on a stand about a case, and that person has a bias, the frame's being determined by a third party. The frame's being determined by the judge or the jury. There's someone else measuring what's happening. And when we run up against confirmation bias like this, we have to tell the truth about it. You have to look at them and say, you're just going to ignore the evidence. You're just going to ignore what's being said here. You're just not going to pay attention here, because essentially what you've told me is that evidence is not evidence. And we know it is because the judge let it in. We know it is because it followed all the rules. We know it is because I did everything that was supposed to be done with this piece of evidence for the judge to allow it in as a reliable piece of evidence, an authentic piece of evidence. And you're ignoring it because it doesn't fit your story, because you're willing to say whatever it takes to hang on to your story, no matter what the evidence is. And that's confirmation bias. And when you get it, frankly, these days, and when early in my career, I used to be freaked out about it. I'm like, well, what if they just ignore it and just won't admit it? I mean, it's terrible for my client. But the truth is that any third party that's looking in, anybody that's watching, will see confirmation bias, and they'll punish the person for it. They'll say, well, that person is just willing to say anything. That person is just willing to say anything that matches their version of the story, and they're not willing to look and see that there's an actual version, a true version that exists out there that might not be the same as theirs, and admit it. Admit that their version of the story is wrong. And that's a tough thing to do, right? It's tough for me to admit that my version of my own story is wrong sometimes, and that I have to reconsider where I'm at, reconsider the facts, reconsider the evidence, reconsider what I'm doing in my life to achieve a particular target. I either have to change the target or I have to change the behavior. I either have to change the target of my body and my weight or my body fat percentage, or I have to change my behavior. But not changing my behavior or not changing the target and just sitting around feeling bad about it, that's nonsense, right? And so it's interesting how that works inside my own life, my own confirmation bias about what I think is going wrong, or what I think I'm not doing right, or what I think is not being effective in my life. And really the truth is that it's other matters, right? Really the truth is that it's another thing. And so as I was talking to this detective and half paying attention to this person because I was getting frustrated with their nonsense, I actually started thinking about, well, I do the same kind of thing with food. I have a confirmation bias with food as well, because I tend to think that it's always about exercise, but oftentimes it's not. Oftentimes I'm not paying attention and I want to eat donuts on Saturday morning, so it's not about my diet. So I forgive the detective for having confirmation bias on her part of the story, and I hope she hangs on to it, because if I do have to try it in front of a judge or a jury, then that confirmation bias eventually will be held against her. That confirmation bias will eventually make her pay the consequence of being foolishly hanging on to a story that is obviously not true. So anyway, that's my bit on confirmation bias. I hope you guys are having a wonderful day. We will talk to y'all soon.